Every moment of my life, I am where I am because of advantages that I did not earn. Advantages that my grandmother and great-grandmother never had. And while I could probably tell my story as if it were all linear and planned out, how each speechwriting job prepared me for the next one, how I kept making more connections, each of which helped me get my next gig, that's not how I see it. I see my career as consisting of 1 crashed party, 2 failed jobs, 3 losing campaigns, a lot of missed law school classes, and several instances when, because of my own doubt or risk aversion or short-sightedness, I came very close to turning down life-changing opportunities. I mean, guys, I got some of my most important jobs in politics because I met a guy named Josh my first year of law school. And it is hard to think that you are so amazing when you realize that you are where you are not just because of your own talent and hard work, but because of so many fortunate accidents and moments of grace and acts of kindness and support from others. But my family's story doesn't just ground me, it also very much informs my writing. You know, people often ask me, how did you get Mrs. Obama's voice? And I actually think they're being polite when they ask this. I think that what they really want to ask is, how did you, a white Jewish girl who's the daughter of a corporate lawyer from a Boston suburb, capture the voice of an African-American woman from a working-class family on the south side of Chicago? And they're right, that Mrs. Obama and I have very different stories and life experiences. But when she talks about how in her family, education was like a religion, how her parents didn't have college degrees, but were absolutely determined to send her and her brother to college because they knew that education was the key to success, I hear my own family's values. That's what my brother and I were taught by our parents. When she talks about her father who had multiple sclerosis and how as he got sicker, he had to wake up earlier because it took him longer to button his uniform and drag himself across their apartment using 2 canes, but he still hardly ever missed a day of work, I think about my grandmother. I think about how she would pore over Barron's and Forbes magazines late into the night to learn more about the stock market. And then she would wake up the next morning to get down on her hands and knees and scrub the floors of those apartments she rented out because she couldn't afford to hire cleaners. Mrs. Obama's father and my grandmother believed the exact same thing, that you are entitled to nothing, that you have to work for everything you have, and that you do whatever it takes to provide for your family. And finally, I think about how in her convention speech last year, Mrs. Obama talked about all those before her who, and I quote, felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today, I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. Now, my family's experience in this country is very, very different from her family's experience. But there is a similar thread of yearning and sacrifice for the next generation that runs through both our stories. My grandmother never got to realize her dreams of being a lawyer and going into politics. But today, I have a degree from Harvard Law School, and every day for the past 8 years, I walked through the gates of the White House to get to work. My great-grandmother never realized her dreams of sending her daughters to college. But believe it or not, the last commencement speech that Mrs. Obama gave was at none other than the City College of New York. And 3 generations later, I rolled up to that school in a motorcade with the First Lady of the United States of America. And today, I am the proud aunt of a 1-month-old baby niece whose name is Catherine. She's named after her great-grandmother, who was named after a kind Irish lady, a fellow striving immigrant to this country who helped her family more than a century ago. This is not a Jewish story or an African-American story. This is an American story. It is the very story told by President John Adams when he said, and I quote, "I must study politics and war, that my sons may have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, naval architecture, commerce, in order to give their children a right to study painting, poetry, music." This is what we mean when we talk about the American dream. That with hard work, we can do well for ourselves and leave something even better for our kids. And it worries me that this American ideal is under siege as we see rising inequality and declining social mobility. And stories like mine are becoming more and more difficult to achieve.